Thank you very much, Minister McGuinty. Dear David, thank you, Dave. Thank you, Dave. Thank you all. Heather, others, that's it. That's it for the Daves. Before I begin, I do want to acknowledge something that we're all feeling, sensing. Thousands of Canadians' lives have been upended, are being upended by the wildfires across this country, flooding in Manitoba again. And on behalf of all Canadians, everyone in this room, all Canadians across this country, I want to thank the courageous firefighters, the first responders, the Indigenous and local leaders who are working tirelessly to keep our people safe. And in the presence of the Minister and the Canadian Armed Forces, I want to acknowledge their contribution. The RCAF is providing search and rescue aircraft. The Canadian Interagency Force Fire Centre is providing helicopters. We're in close communication with our provincial municipal counterparts, and we'll stand ready and we'll be providing additional assistance as needed, because Canadians always look after each other. Now, we're here today in London, General Dynamics Land Systems Canada, at the headquarters, not just the headquarters, but the factory, not just the factory, but the Research and Development Centre, soup to nuts, the entire operation. I just had an amazing tour that only began to scratch the surface of this amazing company, this amazing facility, amazing workforce, and I want to thank Heather for that tour, thank the whole team at GDLS-Canada for hosting us. There's more than 1,700 Canadians who work in this factory, designing and building the armored vehicles that roll into service around the world for the Canadian Armed Forces and our allies. And that's where I want to begin. I want to begin with the people who depend on what's built here. Over the past year, Canada has been strengthening our ability to defend ourselves at home, to protect North America, to support our allies. The Canadian Armed Forces are deployed now across a single, very large crescent that runs from our Arctic across the European high north, down through the Baltics to Latvia. In the Canadian Arctic, we now have 365-day, year-round presence on land, sea, air, and space. Our forces are working with Nordic partners under the NATO umbrella to provide collective defense in the high north, including on exercises such as cold response. And in Latvia, recently, just last week, actually, the Minister of National Defense and I announced that we are extending and expanding our leadership role protecting NATO's eastern flank, literally on the front line with Russia through Operation Reassurance. Now, that presence, that service, that sacrifice of the women and men of our armed forces must be matched by best-in-class capabilities, because the world's changed. Les régimes autoritaires s'affirment de plus en plus. Nous faisons face à des menaces grandissantes, que l'on pense à l'incursion dans l'Arctique canadien ou aux cyberattaques. Ajoutons à ce que la nature de la guerre change rapidement à cause de la prolifération des drones, de systèmes autonomes et de missiles hypersoniques. And in this more dangerous and divided world, Canadian leadership will be defined not just by the strength of our values, but also the value of our strength. That strength must be modernized, reinforced, and built to last. That was the conviction behind our announcement just last week in Halifax to procure up to 12 submarines from Germany's TKMS, the largest defense procurement in Canadian history. That was the conviction behind our decision to procure the P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft. Same conviction, deploying the first of 15 River-class destroyers, contracting the Arctic over-the-horizon radar system, acquiring new long-range precision precision strike capabilities, and establishing a secure, sovereign, low Earth orbit communications constellation. And it's the same conviction behind today's announcement. L'armée canadienne a besoin de nouveaux véhicules parce qu'elle est de plus en plus présente au pays et à l'étranger. Des véhicules qui sont conçus pour durer, avec des capacités de prochaine génération qui viennent renforcer notre flotte vieillissante. Conçus pour protéger, avec un blindage de pointe pour protéger nos soldats au combat, et conçus pour l'avenir, avec des technologies pouvant répondre aux contraintes de la guerre moderne. The Canadian Armed Forces need a new fleet of vehicles to support their operation, not just today, but for decades to come. And to that end, Minister McGuinty and I are proud to announce the launch of a new strategic partnership with General Dynamics Land Systems Canada. And it's through this partnership, our government, and this is one aspect of the partnership, let me be clear, but through this partnership, our government will invest nearly $2 billion over 4 years to build and deliver 190 armored combat support vehicles, expanding our fleet to 550 vehicles. And as the people in this room and those you represent know, these vehicles are designed to keep soldiers protected, mobile, and mission-ready in the most demanding environments. For decades, GDLS-Canada has made vehicles that supported the CAF on military bases across our country, in Afghanistan, in Latvia, and also, as we just announced last week, the provision of another 35 vehicles to Ukraine to help defend themselves against Russia. Thank you, and thank you for that. And the new fleet order that we're announcing today will continue that legacy, serving our women and men in uniform at bases across the country. Every single one will be built right here at GDLS Canada's factory, right here in London. Our new partnership with GDLS Canada will create and sustain over 6,000 high-paying Canadian jobs every year over the next 8 years. There's more because behind every vehicle is an entire supply chain of Canadian ingenuity, skill, and craftsmanship. Technicians at Ryan Manufacturing in Richmond, Ontario, who build the military-grade cable and wire harness assemblies that power these vehicles and keep them connected. Steel workers at Interpro in Regina, Saskatchewan, who produce advanced armor that helps protect our troops. The engineers at Thales in Saint Laurent, who design the thermal imaging systems that allow our soldiers to operate in the toughest conditions. The electricians at IMP Aerospace and Defense in Enfield, Nova Scotia, who build the specialized components that keep these vehicles mission ready, and many, many more. All of those parts, each crafted intricately, built by Canadians from British Columbia to Nova Scotia, arrive here on the London factory floor where workers, skilled workers, turn them into advanced armored combat vehicles. And that's part of the core strength of GDLS Canada, because they work across this entire supply chain. In fact, this company already supports well more than 10,000 jobs nationwide, above and beyond that 6,000 expected to be created by this partnership. Congratulations. So, to the workers here, you have the women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces and our allies relying on you. And you also have workers and families across the country relying on you. You should feel very, very proud of what you're accomplishing. Et dans un monde plus dangereux et plus divisé, le Canada doit redoubler d'efforts pour assurer sa défense, préserver sa souveraineté et soutenir ses alliés. Et il doit le faire en investissant dans les travailleurs canadiens, l'acier canadien et le secteur canadien de la fabrication. C'est comme ça que nous allons bâtir une économie canadienne plus forte, plus indépendante et plus résiliente. Now, today's announcement is an exemplar of our defense industrial strategy in action. This is a bold plan to get our armed forces what they need, when they need it, to scale Canadian defense companies, and to put hundreds of billions of dollars that we need to protect ourselves and our allies, but to put those hundreds of billions of dollars to work in strategic sectors of our economy. We have a simple framework: build, partner, buy. First and foremost, we're focused on building in Canada, directing procurement to Canadian firms that have what we call sovereign capabilities. This is what we're talking about. This is what we're doing here today with GDLS-Canada. Now, there will be many cases where we don't have all those capabilities here in Canada. So we look to partner with trusted allies. And that's what we're doing with an announcement we made in May, when we entering into negotiations to procure Saab's Global Eye surveillance aircraft. It's an early warning and control system that helps detect and deter threats across our Arctic and beyond. That contract includes a commitment to support 3,000 Canadian jobs and to ensure that 1/3 of the projected fleet, the global fleet of the Global Eye, not just the Canadian order, is manufactured here in Canada. That fleet's already expanded with the announcement by NATO that the alliance will use the Global Eye as its preferred aircraft. Now, when it's not feasible, and these cases will happen as well, when it's not feasible to build or partner, Canada is buying equipment from allies, but with clear conditions that spurs reinvestment into our defense industrial base. That's the strategy behind the submarine procurement. And as one example, as a condition of that contract, 100% of the value of the investment must be matched here in Canada. By design, that process will have by far the greatest economic impact right here in Canada. And I want to say a few words about another aspect of today's announcement, the strategic partnership framework, because this is another way in which we're building a stronger Canadian defense industry. That strategic partnership framework will help strengthen Canada's defense industrial base through long-term, predictable partnerships with the best in Canadian industry. Through this framework, we're creating a pathway for Canadian companies like GDLS-Canada to work more closely with our government to build those sovereign capabilities, the armored vehicles, the drones, the icebreakers, the equipment that our armed forces needs. Companies selected as strategic partners commit to invest in Canadian research and development, the kind of R&D that happens right here, to grow domestic supply chains, the kind of supply chains that GDLS Canada has, and hire Canadian workforce and wherever possible, union workforce. And I want to give a shout out to Unifor for their contribution. And what happens in return is that the federal government will act as an anchor customer, will accelerate approvals, and will open doors to new export markets. Commitment's simple. When Canadian companies build for Canada, Canada will build right alongside them. We launched this framework less than 2 months ago at CANSEC, and today we're announcing, as you know, GDLS Canada will be our first strategic partner. That's the kind of decisive and quick action that Canadians expect and this moment demands. Now, it's been nearly 50 years right here in London that GDLS-Canada began building vehicles that has carried Canada's strength around the world. Vehicles that turn Canadian steel and ingenuity into Canadian security. Today, we're renewing that strength. We're ensuring it's built in Canada by Canadians. Nous allons réinvestir pour rebâtir et réarmer les forces canadiennes. Nous accordons aux membres de nos forces armées la plus importante augmentation salariale depuis une génération, car leur rémunération doit être à la hauteur de leurs responsabilités. Nous avons déjà atteint l'objectif de 2% fixé par l'OTAN en matière de dépenses militaires pour la première fois depuis la chute du mur du Berlin. Et cet objectif ne constitue pas un plafond pour les investissements du Canada dans le domaine de la défense, mais plutôt une référence. Notre cadre budgétaire prévoit déjà des mesures visant à consacrer 4% de notre PIB à la défense d'ici la fin de cette décennie. Nous avons également lancé la toute première stratégie industrielle de défense du Canada et mis sur pied l'Agence de l'investissement pour la défense afin de réduire les délais, de renforcer des partenariats et de répondre aux besoins de nos forces armées et de notre économie. Canada is stepping up to protect ourselves and our allies. And if we're going to deter Russian aggression in the Baltic states and across Europe, if we're going to ensure a just and lasting peace in Ukraine, if we are to assert our full sovereignty in the Arctic, and if we're to defend and promote our values of freedom, democracy, peace, we must do so from a position of strength. If we want a stronger world, if we want a safer world, we need a stronger Canada. Let me finish with this. Every day, the women and men serving in the Canadian Armed Forces make Canada stronger. They deserve the very best equipment that this country can build. And the very best this country can build is made right here at GDLS Canada. Thank you for what you do, and I look forward to your questions.